loud years, full of debates and arguments, jokes and laughter, beer and whiskey, left and right, winding roads and hypnotic screens, madness and depression, partisanship and transcendence. In the first 12 months of my podcast, I learned a lot. But in the last 12, I came to question all of that again. At the peak of certainty and vitriol, you see only a higher mountain of ideas. I can hardly believe all of the people who let me interview them over the past year. From childhood heroes like Jake the Snake Roberts and Jason David Frank, to legendary artists like Donovan and Jim Steranko, to political leaders like Ron Paul and Ralph Nader. This second year had been harder than the first. It required more work, including driving across the country to see a Hillary Clinton rally and a Donald Trump rally on the same Iowa day. I risked my life filming the riots in Washington on the day of Trump's inauguration, and I drank with my friends in a basement and laughed at the absurdity of the world. Yes, this second year was a struggle, and it was fulfilling, and time-consuming, and scary, and maddening. But for the rest of my life, I know I'll always be able to look back and remember fondly those 365 days between 2 Augusts, when I learned about myself and my nation, my beliefs, and the cartoonish grandeur of the modern world. Here is a look back on those events, along with a recording that I never released before, philosophizing on the death of Ringling brothers and Barnum and Bailey. These were my conversations, my adventures, my rock to roll. This was the second year of PRIMO NUTMEG. Of course, the one thing that most people will remember about the last year was the election. In fact, in many ways, the election continues today. But in those last few weeks before November 8th, the world was on edge. None of us knew which way it would go, yet most of us didn't want it to go either way. Here's a look back at several episodes covering the election of 2016.
There was not. He was just getting more snorting and glowering.
Let's talk about that. What was with all that sniffing? Like, that was some hardcore sniffing going on.
Did you filling his lungs to spew out the hot air? You know.
Did you see the Howard Dean tweet?
Yeah, actually, I was gonna get to that later, but yeah, Howard Dean, the former chair of the DNC, sent out a tweet at one point, and the tweet. Do I even have it? It said, "Notice Trump sniffing all the time. Coke user?" ?
What?
And he was jawing a lot too, so it's a fair.
Well, I know he's been taking diet pills since the '80s. That's what keeps him going all day.
So
yeah,
and yet he's very bloated.
Fantastic drug. I love Dexatrim. It gives me a huge rush of energy.
Well, his hands are very tiny.
No, see,
he's got huge hands.
Huge hands.
Terrific.
Is that rumor true? Like, you think that's really true that he still sends that guy
That guy says it's true. So
I bet he does, and that's
copies of his hands.
And I'm sure Clinton
stationary.
Clinton did play right into that sort of childish narcissism that Trump has. You know, you start kind of insulting him instead of talking about the issues. You got him on the defensive about nonsense. Yeah. It just makes him look like an idiot.
Yeah, Hillary Clinton's not wrong. Donald Trump is psychologically unbalanced.
Right.
He's not a sane person.
No. But neither is she, you know, but she's so much better about it. It's like the difference between, Hannibal Lecter and Leatherface, you know? One's very calculating, one's very intelligent, one knows exactly what he's doing, the other's just like a maniac.
Could you talk a little bit about the Saudi Arabian government's relationship with the Clinton Foundation and what the State Department did during Hillary Clinton's administration?
The Saudis have been major donors to the Clinton Foundation. On the foundation's own website, you see them in the category of between $10 and $25 million donors. And yet when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, there are leaked cables that show how disgusted she was with the Saudis because they were funding all these extremist groups around the world. Instead of using her position as Secretary of State to try to impose sanctions on the Saudis, she instead okayed massive amounts of weapons sales. And not only that, a major contributor to her campaign, a bundler for her, and the brother of the chair of her presidential campaign is Tony Podesta of the Podesta Group, who is a paid foreign agent of the Saudi government receiving $140,000 every month from the Saudis. So the ties with Clinton are deep and are nefarious.
It's going to come down to the wire for me. It really is. It's going to come down to the wire.
Oh, Jesus.
All right,
I'll put
so
it this way, and I know I just met you, and I know this might come across as overly abrasive, but I honestly think if at this point in the election and at this point in the campaign that you find yourself morally capable of voting for Donald Trump, then you are a fundamentally flawed human being.
That wasn't abrasive at all.
Oh, I can't imagine. But I'm just saying, dude, literally the guy is intentionally undermining the very fabric of our democracy by claiming that the election is intentionally rigged against him and that he won't accept the results no matter, or rather if he loses,
right,
he'll only accept the results if he wins. And on top of that, he's claiming he wants to do all of these things that are constitutionally illegal. I mean, it's reprehensible. And then not even to mention the fact the guy brags about sexually assaulting women and having the license to do so because he's rich and famous.
Yep.
I mean,
There's
you
a lot there.
really could not find a more detestable human being to vote for.
Well, the Democrats found one.
Oh, bull fucking shit, man. To even say that there's even any comparison between the type of political evil that Hillary is and the type of moral
droning women and children is
Trump
just that's reprehensible. So you're supporting an imperialist. You're supporting Dick Cheney in a pantsuit.
No, I'm not, dude. You're talking about the military situation of the world that has been this way for years and years and years and years. You can't necessarily take all the precedent that has led up to this and then just blame one individual player in it. And that's what you're doing with Hillary Clinton. You're saying that, she's to blame for all of this shit.
She's consented, though. She hasn't. She didn't. You know what she could have done, Josh? Back when we were thinking about invading Iraq, she could have stood up and said, the Democratic Party does not stand for shedding blood on foreign soil for oil.
Or just voted no.
Yeah, and I'm sure that would have really reflected well on a state that, 9/11 happened and we were still under the impression that Iraq actually had something to do with it. You just, I know that you're sighing and you're saying, all I'm saying is
dude,
that,
I don't know how to explain it. I just feel like I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but I feel like you're selling out, you're just totally giving in to the other side and saying, well, it's okay. Joe Lieberman is pretty much the same as Ralph Nader.
No, Joe Lieberman is fucking Satan. I fucking hate Joe Lieberman.
Hillary Clinton is the same fucking thing. It's the same person. There's no difference.
No, he's not.
What is the difference? You tell me right now. What is the difference between Joe Lieberman and Hillary Clinton?
Left the Democratic Party.
He got kicked out for being a conservative. So what is your fear if Hillary does win? What's going to happen to the country?
Well, we're going to have a revolution, no doubt about it. It's not going to be pretty because it's corrupt. The corruption is so deep, and it's people getting paid off. The Democrats are paying the Republicans are paying the Democrats off. And it's the same mentality. Like a Hillary supporter usually had one or two things that are dear to their heart. It's either Planned Parenthood, it's a cell phone they have in their pocket, or it's welfare, or it's a union, or they're going to lose some benefit. The hell with the country. And that's the same mentality a politician has. It's self-centeredness, it's selfishness, it's what's good for me, and the heck with everything else.
Right. I guess just my concern is, it seems like people are they've been getting more divided over the years, or more partisan, I suppose, and now it's reached this point where I don't see how the country would come together if either one wins. I mean, how does that happen?
Well, we need to unify. We need to get this racist stuff out of here. I'm not racist. I'm called racist and a bigot because I support Donald Trump. I have $1,000 reward for anybody that proves that Donald Trump's a racist. They don't come forward. See? Yeah. I mean, you get profanity right here in the interview. I get it every day. And so, there's no racism.
You're really putting yourself out here.
Exactly.
Literally.
I have to be armed, and I am.
What is your name, sir?
My name is Luke Pumphrey.
And you're standing out here outside of Progressive Field, before Game 1 of the World Series, and you have an American flag with a peace sign instead of the stars. What are you doing out here tonight?
Well, basically promoting peace. Sometimes people ask me, where are the stars on your flag? I said, well, they're in hiding. They're shamed and disgusted and embarrassed with all the death and destruction and instability we've caused in the Middle East. 2 million Iraqi men, women, and children killed, 4,500 Americans killed so far. And for what? It's an exercise in futility. It's an enormously counterproductive. It's like we're trying to put out a fire with gasoline. It's just terribly wasteful. There are only two benefits, and I put benefits in quotes. It mollifies, placates millions of fearful, gullible, naive Americans who buy into the fear-mongering from politicians. The second benefit, in quotes, is it fattens the bottom lines of war profiteers, euphemistically called defense contractors. Halliburton, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, General Dynamics, United Technologies, Raytheon, BAE Systems, all these war profiteers feeding off of people's fear and insecurity. All we're doing is making matters worse.
Now, I see that you are wearing some medals. Were you in the armed forces?
Yes, I was drafted in 1966. Basic training at Fort Benning, advanced individual training at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Got orders to Vietnam in June of 1967. I was there from July of 67 to July of 68. Though a lieutenant I knew was a great guy, was killed 3 days after his 23rd birthday in the Tet Offensive. Such a waste. All those more than 58,000 Americans, perfectly healthy Americans, sent to early graves, and for what? Fear-mongering LBJ and other politicians.
So, obviously, you're making this statement here in the backdrop of the election. Do you have any stance on the presidential election?
Good question. The terrible choices, really. Even Bernie Sanders, all these politicians think there's a military solution to these terrorists wearing civilian clothes, living among civilians. It's exactly the winning strategy the Viet Cong had in Vietnam. Now, the definition, Albert Einstein said, definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. The results in the Middle East been any different than Vietnam? Hell no.
So do you support any candidates, or do you find any alternatives worse than others?
Philosophically, I like Jill Stein and the Green Party. The Green Party looks at war as the same as Veterans for Peace, which I'm a member of. Look at war only as a last resort. Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. What the heck did we go over there for? It's terrible. Terrible.
Because you have Donald Trump calling the election rigged, and also they're concerned that Democrats might get complacent. Take a listen to what the First Lady had to say yesterday.
When you hear folks talking about a global conspiracy and saying that this election is rigged, understand that they are trying to get you to stay home.
Prison! Prison!
Anything you care about for your families, your own futures, our country, and the world will be on the ballot. Now, for example, women's health rights and dignity will be on this ballot. And we know that Donald Trump has demeaned and insulted women not only throughout this campaign, but literally for decades. And we heard the tape of him bragging about what he did to women. And it was shocking, but not surprising. And since then, one woman after another has come forward and said, what he said on that tape is what he did to me. Well, what did Donald do in response? He started holding big rallies, broadcast on TV, and basically said he couldn't possibly have done those things because the women speaking out were not attractive enough for him to have assaulted. He said one woman, quote, would not be my first choice. He called the female journalist covering the story disgusting, something he said about other women. But this is all part of a pattern of behavior. You know, he did a lot of interviews with the radio personality Howard Stern, and there's tape of it. He talks, he brags about routinely barging into the dressing rooms of beauty pageant contestants while they were undressed to, in his word, inspect the women. I sort of get away with that, he said. Well, I guess because he owned the pageant. And the most alarming part of what he said is that he did this even with teenage contestants. Young women in their teens vying for the Miss Teen USA contest. Can you imagine? This is a man who relishes making women feel terrible about themselves in every possible way. Someone who thinks belittling and objectifying women makes him a bigger man. He goes after women's dignity, their sense of self-worth. I don't think there's a woman anywhere who doesn't know what that feels like. And if you have a sister, a daughter, or a granddaughter, wife, or a mother, think hard about this, because this is who Donald Trump is. Now it's time for all of us to stand up and say, this is not who we are.
Why are you supporting Hillary Clinton?
I actually realized I was going to support Hillary Clinton 8 years ago.
Wow.
When she came out in support in her enthusiasm for the Barack Obama campaign. So I knew I was going to support her 8 years ago. And I just have gotten really involved in the campaign. I love it. I feel like it's the first female president. I have 5 granddaughters, so I'm so excited about her campaign. I'm so excited about sharing it with them and telling the history of voting for the first female president. So, yeah.
So is there any particular issue, or is it just that you want there to be a female president?
No. I have a couple of issues. I'd like my children to be able to think of my grandchildren to actually dream about going to college. If they know that there's money out there for them to get to go to college, I think it'll sit in their minds as young children that they can actually reach these dreams. Because as black families, a lot of black families don't plan for college because they never know if they're going to have the money. And I think if you get it in the idea of these children when they're very young, that there will be help for them to attend college with their great grades, and even if they don't have all the money in the world, that this is and don't have the best of grades, but that this is something that they can strive for. I also love the fact that she wants to do equal pay for equal women, and what I really like about Hillary Clinton is the relationship that she had with her mother. Okay. And so it reminds me of a relationship I had with my mom, and something that I just want to carry on with my grandchildren the way she has with Chelsea and her grandchildren. And I just think it gives little girls the ability to look and say, I can be president too. History books are, for me, like African American. The history books of presidents were always men and white men, and now little black boys will be able to look and see Barack Obama up there with the change, and then the change from our first black president to our first female president. And it just gives kids this goal that they can look at when they're young and know that they can reach for that.
Hillary Clinton destroyed 33,000 emails, destroyed 13 iPhones, 2 boxes of email evidence went mysteriously missing. Maybe now they'll be able to find it. She put her office up for sale to large corporations, donors, and foreign powers. Those same special interests are now spending millions on her campaign in an effort to keep their corrupt grip on power.
So you folks are out here protesting across the street from a Donald Trump rally.
Right.
That just got out. I'm just wondering why you folks are out here.
Basically, I'm a school teacher, and I believe that, and I teach kids with special needs, and I really don't think Donald Trump represents my beliefs, just because the fact that he's picking on people with disabilities and doesn't like and picks against minorities, and I just felt it's a good time to come out and just try to exercise my First Amendment rights, which are peaceful protests. And as you can see, we're getting surrounded by people that don't believe that we should have a right to protest.
So are you more of a Hillary supporter, or just you're fearful of what a Trump presidency would be?
More fearful of what a Trump presidency would be, probably. I can't say that I'm a flat-out Hillary supporter. I'll probably end up voting for Hillary. I think she probably would have the most experience for her country, probably help us the most. And being in education, I think she does have a good feel for what her kids need in school and that kind of thing. So, yeah, I can't say I disagree with her, okay? But definitely I'm for pretty much anything against I'm against anything that pretty much Trump is for.
Why do you think all these people support Donald Trump?
You know, I really think there's a lot of people that are, for some reason, afraid, angry, whatever, feel like the American dream passed them up. And I feel like they're just basically, he's given them a voice. And I think that's it. I think it's just someone as polarizing as he is, because he pretty much says what he wants and does what he wants without any type of governor on him, if you will. He just says what he wants, and I think these people, a lot of times, they want to say what they want to say sometimes, and I think that they're kind of expressing their feelings through him. That makes sense?
Yeah, I guess, you know, my concern might be, regardless of who wins, people are so divided that I don't see, even, I mean, after Election Day, how are things going to be any better?
It's not. It's not. That's the sad part about it.
So what brought you folks out here to the Donald Trump rally tonight?
Well, I've just been a supporter of Donald Trump since he put his name in for it. Well, we supported him even when the caucus started. We voted for him in the caucus.
And why is that? Are there any particular issues that you really identify with?
Yeah, because the country, the last 8 years, we've had administration has just been horrible, and the economy hasn't done anything. Everything's stagnant. Foreign policy has gone bad, and just ready for a change. You know, just tired of somebody that does illegal things and is able to run for president.
Sure, and I guess maybe I'm a little confused sometimes, because it seems like they're really strong emotions, like right here, right now.
Yeah.
I don't know if maybe there are people who just hate Hillary Clinton and that's why they support Donald Trump, or they really identify with Donald Trump and hating Hillary Clinton is kind of auxiliary. Like,
I don't hate anybody. I just feel they are not behind us.
It's hard to believe. Yesterday we had a really horrible day with Standing Rock, and you know the police force came onto our land, and they came with spray cans and pepper spray on our treaty land, and I don't think that's right at all. If they're coming onto our reservation and spraying everybody, hurting people, and there's been mass arrests, and just watching that brought tears to my eyes.
I don't know if you have an opinion on this, or if it's relevant really, but you mentioned Jill Stein, and this is also 10 days before a major presidential election. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that at all.
On the president election, I support Jill. I support Jill she came to the front lines, and I was there, and I I was happy to see that somebody cared, because we're pushed off to the side, and they act like our opinion doesn't matter.
Amazingly, America has lost, listen to this, 70,000 factories since China entered the World Trade Organization. Another Bill and Hillary-backed disaster.
Ooh, I
We are
love
living
factories.
through the single greatest jobs theft in the history of the world. There's never been anything like this. The Trump administration will stop the jobs from leaving America, and we will stop the jobs from leaving New Hampshire. Believe me.
Yeah! Woo! Factories! Let's make the Merrimack great again!
If a company wants to fire their workers, leave New Hampshire and move to another country,
we'll execute,
and then ship their products back into the United States through what will soon be a very, very strong and powerful border.
Throbbing border. Securing that Canadian border is going to be a hell of a job. It's like 4,500 miles wide or something. Build two walls! Build two walls!
He just splashed water all over the crowd.
That was awesome. It's like Ozzy.
35% tax.
That fucking kid in the red tie just splashed water out.
Well, it's a selfie picture. He like threw water on it.
They're never leaving. They're staying. They're staying. We will renegotiate.
Jack, you're here again. And Rob is now joining us. Hi, Rob.
Hey, how's it going?
And we are at a bar in Glastonbury, Connecticut that we figured would be a good mixture of Trump and Clinton supporters. I guess we were disagreeing on if that's what it is or not. I think it is.
I don't know, man. Sports bar seems to just scream Trump. Looking around.
Jack, you still think this is going to be a Trump landslide tonight, or are you more pensive now?
No, I think like all this sort of contested states is just gonna like trounce her, and it's gonna be a lot worse for Clinton. The pundits tend to concentrate on like who actually votes during most normal years.
Yeah.
But that's only like what 40% or maybe 35% of the people who are eligible to. But it's like the Joe Prisklowskis in Allentown, you know, like are they gonna vote for an Obama or a Romney? Probably not. But will they vote for a Trump? Fuck yeah.
That's true.
Right, it is 7:30 at the Diamond Pub in Glastonbury. Which means it is trivia time.
I'm just wondering if you know, in running for president, have any specific monetary policy.
At this point, no.
So another topic that I'm really interested to touch on is monetary policy, specifically having a central bank who controls interest rates and controls the issuing of currency and has a monopoly on the issuing of currency. It's an issue that was a lot more important looking back to the founding fathers with the disputes between Jefferson and Hamilton and what Andrew Jackson later did under his presidency. So do you have a monetary policy, or do you have an opinion on if there should be a Federal Reserve and what its role should be?
Well, I have limited opinions on that. It's
a subject I'm really interested in is monetary policy. Do you have any position in terms of monetary policy or the Federal Reserve?
Well, I've heard a lot of bad things about the Federal Reserve not being a part of the government, or I don't know enough about the Federal Reserve to comment at this point.
What is your monetary policy? How should money be regulated or created, and what is your stance on the Federal Reserve?
Well, the Federal, Reserve, is created to really make sure that any of the banks that are in trouble, like what happened in 2007, 2008, to make sure that those banks get bailed out. I mean, I'm not an economist.
I do not know if the Federal Reserve is something. I'm not 100%. I do not understand this subject in its entirety.
So again, I mean, just looking at your website, one thing that I really do agree with you on is abolishing the Federal Reserve. Could you just speak to why we should do that as a nation?
That's not a big issue with me, and I really don't understand the details of it. This is not one of my issues, and I don't understand it, and I shouldn't speak to it.
As far as the Fed is considered, it's worked for many years. I think it can be revised. I'm not an expert on economics, but you can be sure as president I will have the best people in this country to advise me on these things. And I need to learn more about that to make an intelligent decision.
We're going to the fucking eye of the storm here. We're in Hartford, walking into the Hilton. Yeah, there's weed everywhere. This whole nation's. Where's the thing? You think? Excuse me. Where's the Blumenthal?
Third floor.
Third floor. Okay, thanks. It's the governor.
Excuse me.
Senator Murphy, I'm sorry. What would you say to millennials who are concerned about Hillary Clinton's foreign policy? You know, she has a record of supporting the invasion of Iraq, bombing Libya, bombing Syria. What would you say to those folks who do not support war?
You know, I think Hillary Clinton, in many ways, is the originator of the idea of smart diplomacy, the idea that there are other ways to exercise American power abroad besides the use of military force. So I'm excited to have a president who is going to make the argument that we should plus up other tools beyond those just of military projection of force around the world.
Senator, I do a podcast called PRIMO NUTMEG. I was wondering what you say to millennials who are concerned about Hillary Clinton's foreign policy. You know, she supported the invasion of Iraq, bombing Libya, bombing Syria. What would you say to millennials who are concerned about that?
I'm not going to be the pundit here who predicts what the outcome is of the presidential election. But we need a strong national defense, and we need to fight ISIS. But at the same time, make sure we keep our troops out of harm's way. I have two sons who have served. One is deployed right now. So I feel personally that I have a stake in making sure that we avoid any foreign military engagements that are unnecessary.
It's 12:37 a.m. and it seems like Donald Trump is winning, but we're not certain yet. Jack, do you have any thoughts at this point in time? Like, what is it like when Donald Trump may be the next president?
Well, I hate to say I told you so, but I told you so.
Are you surprised? Like, this seems like a really shocking turn of events.
Well, for people who listen to the assholes on the mainstream media and their own fucking confirmation bias nonsense, sure. I'm sure it was a shock for them, but for me, I've been calling it since when? Right? Fucking when? You know, you tell me, Steve. I've been on the podcast enough times talking about it. Trump's going to whip him because he was able to motivate that silent base that doesn't even vote half the time.
Although the election ended, the partisanship did not. And accusations of Russian hacking plague the post-election world. Here's a look back at some of the political discussions that I've had since last November.
When people talk about conspiracy theories, I think they should be cautious. But I believe in a lot of them because I think they're true. But if it's just makeup. But I think people getting together and conspiring or thinking and planning, the loose definition of it is what you and I are doing right now. We're conspiring. We have a little conspiracy here because we'd like to promote more individual liberty out of our own self-interest. We believe we benefit, our family will benefit, the country will benefit, the world will benefit. So we're conspiring for, a special group. Now, the conspiracies that you're talking about, I don't think it's a monolith. There was a time where some groups would say, well, there's 12 people who get together and lay out the plans, and that's why the media are always saying exactly the same thing. But I think it's a conspiracy in the way that education works. There wasn't a person that 100 years ago decided, well, we're going to have Keynesian economic policy, but a bunch of professors endorsed the idea, and they finally taught enough people that everybody, like Nixon said, we're all Keynesians now, but it's an educational conspiracy. But there are these groups, whether it's the banking group. I think the Federal Reserve and the people who control that, it's not so much a conspiracy; it's a reality, of individuals. How it came about, the bankers got together in secret and promoted this and shoved it through and lied about what the real reason was, and it was nothing more than a conspiracy, a plan to protect the wealthy bankers and bail them out if they got into trouble, and that's exactly what happened. Probably in every recession, but especially in 08 and 09, trillions of dollars were used to bail out the bankers. So yes, there's a lot of planning. I don't think it's a monolith. I don't think that we can say exactly who's in charge, but I think the CIA is involved, the intelligence groups, the FBI is involved, the monetary people are involved, and they do get together. They're like-minded, just like you might have a libertarian convention and bring people together on how we would like to undermine, the system that we see as a threat.
I guess my first question would be, do you think that Russia did have an influence in the election? And what do you think of Donald Trump as a president and his foreign policy?
Well, first, we're the teachers. We've overthrown over 50 governments since World War II, the CIA and other operatives. Second, we interfere in all kinds of elections. We interfered in the Russian election. We interfered in the Ukraine election. We interfere in Middle East government elections, So it's sort of strange for us to be so upset, right? Now, they did hack into various systems, Russian-sourced hackers, but I have no evidence yet that they affected the outcome of the election. And we'll see what the House and Senate investigative committees come up with. But I see no effect. How would they affect the House and how would they affect the presidential election? Trump was, blasting off lies and exaggerations and fantasies. It wasn't like they added to it. So we'll see what the investigations come up with. I think it's the usual quest by the Democratic Party when they lose an election, is to scapegoat. And they scapegoat the Green Party in 2000. They love to find a scapegoat because they don't want to change themselves and get new leaders. No, it's Nancy Pelosi, four-time loser, keeps getting elected by her peers in the House as head of the Democrats in the House. So they're always looking for scapegoats instead of looking at themselves in the mirror and say, how come we cannot landslide the worst, ugliest, most vicious, cruel, stupid, warlike Republican Party in its history, indentured to the hilt to Wall Street interests and oil and gas interests? Why can't they landslide them? Because they're dialing for the same dollars. They're dialing for the same commercial dollars. They don't have any new energy in them, and they can't stand competition from the left, which is why they always slam the Green Party, because they instead of taking the issues, which are popular issues like full Medicare for all and higher minimum wage, they should have taken those issues from the Green Party. But they are a decadent party, and as far back as 1980, Robert Reich wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post and started with the words, "The Democratic Party is dead, dead, dead."
Could you state once and for all, separately but simultaneously, what are your relationships or what have been your previous interactions with both George Soros and Vladimir Putin?
Okay, so I've never had any contact with George Soros. The accusation was that he was funding the recount. Actually, our recount was funded by small donors, an average of something like $40 or $45 per donor, and we received contributions under FEC limits, and that is campaign limits. So maximum donation acceptable under FEC limits for a campaign like ours, which got matching funds. You cannot receive over $2,700 from a donor. And, the average donation was far less than that. We had very few donations over $1,000 to to the recount. And for the most part, these were very small donations, massively, overwhelmingly so. So the Soros thing is just somebody's smear campaign. And likewise, the Putin thing is a smear campaign. I went to a conference in Moscow in 2015. And I went really as part of a large peace delegation, in fact. Ironically, if you are a dissident in the U.S., you don't get covered by corporate media. But RT, we have to go to Russia TV in order to get covered if you're a dissident in the U.S. So lots of peace proponents get their message out, to the extent we can, on RT. So people like Tom Hartman, famous Democratic progressive media person, also on RT, was there. Jesse Ventura, a peace advocate as well. Max Blumenthal, and Ray McGovern, former CIA analyst who worked for several presidential administrations, advising presidents on security. A whole slew of peace advocates were actually at this conference because it gave us an opportunity to get our message heard. And my message to everybody, including Russia, the U.S., Putin, Obama, the American voting public, my message is recorded on the video of the presentations that were given that day, the day of that dinner where these photographs were taken. But my message was very clear, and it was a challenge to Vladimir Putin as it was a challenge to Barack Obama and Donald Trump, for that matter, and the Republicans, all the Republican candidates. My message was that Russia, following catastrophic footsteps of the U.S. by entering into its bombing campaign of Syria. That has been my message for a long time. For many years, I have been supporting a peace message. So there are some people who really don't like that message and who've attempted to bury that message beneath a smear campaign, accusing me of being Putin's puppet. But my message was hardly a kiss-up to Putin any more than my message has been a kiss-up to the Democratic Republican parties. I've been calling for a weapons embargo to the Middle East and for a freeze on the bank accounts of those countries that continue to fund terrorism, like Saudi Arabia and Qatar. We need to move forward on a path of peace. Bombing campaigns and expanding this war in Syria or elsewhere in the Middle East is not towards peace. We've seen over and over that this war on terror has only created more terror, failed states, mass refugee migrations, and worse terrorist threats. And there are many out there in the Democratic and Republican parties that don't want to hear that message, because this is actually the message that the American people support. The American people do not like paying almost half of our income taxes that goes to support this bloated and dangerous military budget. The American people are not happy that we've spent about $6 trillion since 9/11 on these wars, which are only getting us in deeper. Worse terrorist threats. We are not defeating the terrorist threat. So at any rate, these are fear campaigns, and it's very important for us to put them behind us.
So one of the main topics that I really wanted to speak with you about today is the subject of quote-unquote Russian hacking and the DNC leaks and WikiLeaks. I think that you probably have a really good perspective on this issue because you ran for president this year and you are somebody who is a legend in the cybersecurity world. So could you just give us a rough outline of what your thoughts are on the DNC leaks and about these accusations that Putin and the Russians were behind them?
Well, I can say this as one of the leading cybersecurity experts in the world. If all signs point to the Russians as the source, I can promise you it is not the Russians. And here is why. Anyone capable of carrying out such a hack is certainly capable of hiding their tracks. It's 10 times easier to make a hack look like it came from somewhere else than it is to do the hack itself. So clearly, I mean, the Russians are smart enough not to leave Russian language in their code or to have IP addresses that end up somewhere in Russia. No, those things were planted there by whoever did it. I have no idea who did it, but because it does point to the Russians forensically, I can promise you it's not them.
As somebody who was in the CIA for 27 years, who has a lot of knowledge about Russia and about geopolitics, can you give us some insight or your thoughts on what happened here?
The charges that Trump owes his office to the Russians are ridiculous on their face. The evidence that has been adduced is non-evidence by a thoroughly politicized intelligence community, the likes of which I have not seen since the fraudulent intelligence, and I say fraudulent, not mistaken, fraudulent intelligence was concocted and adduced to, quote, justify, end quote, the attack on Iraq in March of 2003. This is very distressing to honest intelligence analysts. It manifests itself in many ways. Now let's dispatch with the charges that the Russians are behind Trump's win. I guess the best I can say here is that I was toting up the years, and it's been 59 years since I decided to major in Russian studies at Fordham University in New York. I did a graduate degree in Russian studies, taught Russian, and I was head of the Soviet foreign policy branch at CIA in the 70s. And in the 80s, I was briefing Ronald Reagan's top national security advisors, Bush, Schultz, Weinberger, the whole lot, on this new fellow, Gorbachev, Mikhail Gorbachev, who was acceding to power. Question was whether he was the real deal. And I was able to tell him, based on my experience and relying on the real experts that I knew were honest, that yes, he's the real deal. Deal with him. And as you know, Ronald Reagan did. So, so what I'm saying here is that I think I know a little bit about how Russian leaders look at the world. Now, when I put myself in Vladimir Putin's chair here, okay, I'm sitting here and I'm looking at my advisors and I say, wow, this campaign is really amazing, this American political campaign. Well, we have a guy who not only is unpredictable, but he's proud of it. He brags about being unpredictable, and he lashes out. He's very emotional. He lashes out at any insult or any slight perceived or imagined. This is, hey guys, around the Kremlin table there. This is precise. This is a wonderful. This is exactly the kind of guy I like to have to deal with as head of the United States of America. Give me a break. This is the guy Putin wanted to have his finger on the nuclear codes. So if you set up the premise that Putin and his associates had a distinct preference for Trump over Hillary Clinton, if I dispute that, as I do, and we're seeing it play it out right now, talk about unpredictability, talk about lashing out, that's what Trump is. So unless Putin thinks about the world in a way that no other Russian or Soviet leader that I know has, and unless he was clairvoyant in seeing that Trump was going to win, there's no reason in the whole world that he would have hacked into the DNC computers.
I am ready to deliver on my promises of time travel research, zombie preparedness, mandatory toothbrush law. on. And yes, free voters for every last damn American. It's going to happen, people. It's going to happen. One more thing.
Vermin Supreme just stopped a guy from getting beaten up.
Yeah.
What was he doing, Rob?
Oh, they're burning some shit over there too. Got some stuff on fire. Well, basically, this we've been standing here on the street, and a guy came through. You know, well put together, blazer, dress shirt, jeans. You know, seems to be the uniform for the Trump supporter tonight. And he had come by about 10 minutes earlier screaming Heil Trump and throwing a, semi-fascist salute and agitating these people here. And, I can't say that I didn't see it coming because he walked right into a group of, pretty hardcore folks. So, I noticed a dust-up kind of happening up the road. I wasn't really sure what was going on, but, we were watching this balloon get inflated and the projector going up, decided to go down the street, and immediately just got caught in the crush of this guy getting pummeled. He appeared to have like a laceration or something on his face, so I think he already got some business from somebody, and I got caught right up in the middle of it, and just so happens our buddy Vermin Supreme swooped in. He pushed right by me. He said, "Excuse me, I gotta get to this guy."
Yeah, he went and rescued him.
And he interceded for this guy, and I gotta say, wouldn't expect anything less from Vermin Supreme.
He's a real-life superhero.
He's a fucking amazing American.
So what's happening is we're outside of the deplorable, which is being held at the National Press Building. That's why there's this protest. And anybody, Jesus. Sorry, cops are chasing people now. Everybody's running. All right, so Jesus. Cops are chasing people. They have the mace guns out. So Rob, when we first got here, it seemed like there was a lot of Trump people, like intermixed.
Yeah.
That's kind of gone away now.
No, I think they've all migrated to the far outside. I mean, I definitely still see a lot of them around, but they're being set upon by these protesters.
Yeah, the street itself is it's their streets.
It's become a carnival.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm over here looking at this child fake punching a guy in the face. This 11-year-old kid or something. Mock punching appears to be a Trump supporter. Yep. But I mean, every time one of these groups of attendees from the deplorable ball leaves the press club, they're being, pretty aggressively chased and heckled. And one kid that was next to me threw a full can of spray paint at one of them. So I made some distance from him before he got, beat the fuck up.
The funny thing about this last year is that my podcast also made headlines on several occasions. Here's a look back to some of those conversations with Jake the Snake Roberts, Royce Gracie, and Ken Shamrock.
Working with the honky tonk man at the time was okay, but since then he's become a real piece of shit. This guy is out stealing. Well, he's stealing people's names. He's trying to buy, get the names and own them, and then whenever you try to use your own name, you have to pay him. Seriously. Yeah. Well, he's tried it with too many people now. He's got a few names under his belt. He took there was a masked guy, the Patriot. He owns that name. What really? He went to the trademark registration people, see. And, if you let it run out, then somebody else can buy it, for $3.50 or whatever. And so now any money that's made by the Patriot, the money goes to him. Wow. Yeah. That's insane. Well, they tried that with my name. Can you believe that? Yeah. Yeah, he's got one. Yeah, that scumbag piece of shit. Yeah, he also bought Jim Duggan. He also got Jim Duggan's name. I hate to be the honky tonk man when Jim Duggan gets hold of his ass. That will not be pretty. And I just ran into him the other day, and all I did was look at him, and the guy has no balls. He simply just ducked his head and held his head down, man, and just sucked up to some girl that was working for him there at the con. You know, I've seen him in the past dress his son up with a mask and call him the Patriot and cheat the fans out of money, selling them bogus Patriot stuff. And, you know, come on, man. You know, what are you, you know? And, you know, I guess that's what drunks do. I used to be a drunk. I did some dumb shit, but I never did shit that dumb.
So, if we could talk a little bit about your most recent fight. You fought Ken Shamrock last year. That was the third in your trilogy. What did you think about that fight coming out of that? Was that everything that you had hoped it to be? Would you like to fight him again? Just what are your thoughts after having fought Ken Shamrock in Bellator?
There's no reason to fight him again. The strategy was perfect. We timed everything. Everything was a perfect strategy. Delivered just like we trained.
Are there other fights that you still would like to have, or are you retired now?
I've been trying to retire for the last 10 years. There's a list of guys that want to fight me. So I don't pick opponents, never did. So it's up to the promoter. Promoter calls me up, just tell me when to show up and I'll be there. They even have to tell me who is it.
Anyway, spilt milk under the bridge, no problem. Let's move on. So I want Royce Gracie now. Let that go. It's done. Let's just finish on a good note. So I go in there and I get Royce Gracie, and there's really no doubt in my mind that I'm going to squash him. And the game plan was just to go in there, make him move around, because we know he's going to be hyper, because he's going to be afraid. There's no question. And he's going to be all over the ring until he slows down. And once he slows down, then we'll unload on him. We're going to keep him on his feet. We're going to beat him up. And that's the way the fight went. And then as soon as he started to slow down and we clinched, he hit me with a low shot. And it was, and in my opinion, we're all professionals here. We're responsible for the punches and the kicks and knees that we throw. We are professionals, and we know and we should have the best of abilities to be able to land those somewhere close to the target. And that was way off target, and in my opinion, intentional, because he realized that he was not going to have the fight go where he wanted to go, and that was going to be on the ground. He was going to have to stand up, and he was going to get beat up. And so he threw the low blow, knowing that if the referee saw it, he might be disqualified. Instead, the referee don't see it, and he gets his hand raised. And then, in my opinion, instead of being a professional fighter and say, yeah, my bad, sorry, let's do it again, he says, hey, man, you should have known that's the way we used to fight. Wow.
Well, I do have to ask you.
And to answer your question, do I want to fight him again? Hell yes. Awesome. Hell yes. And it's a damn shame that they're going to allow this to go in the history books like that.
When I was a kid, the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers were my heroes. I idolized them and wanted to be just like them. Earlier this year, I got to speak with 4 of the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers: Jason David Frank, Walter Emmanuel Jones, David Yost, and Amy Jo Johnson.
Hey guys, this is Jason David Frank, and you are listening to PRIMO NUTMEG. Interesting podcast for interesting people. That's right, Green Ranger time.
I know that you had talked about possibly fighting CM Punk, which I know a lot of fans out there would love to see.
They would love it. I mean, if Punk fights again, everybody at the banks, everybody that owns UFC wants me to fight him. So,
absolutely,
if he fights again, that's definitely something I would like to do. And man, I got a chance to visit, some of the WWE guys on their shows and seeing backstage. It's much like, UFC. I'm not talking about the fighting, but, the energy everyone puts into the show. So one way or another, I'd love to either get involved with WWE or UFC just to please the fans. For me, I've been fighting my whole entire life. I can do it tomorrow if I want. I love it. It just has to make sense why we're doing it.
Right.
And it has to, and what I mean by makes sense is not a financial sense, because I'd fight CM Punk for $1. I would do, a Power Ranger movie for nothing. I'm not financially hurt. What I'm saying is if it makes sense for my fan base. Do my fans say, yes, that's what I want to see him? Yes, I like to see him in Bloodshot. Oh, I don't like that terrible he did. So I always like going back to the fans thinking, is this something they want? Because if it is, I'll do it. And it's not about money at all. And that's what I mean about making sense. For CM Punk, for him, it makes sense on a financial level, but I'm super different than most of these people out there. And that's the truth. Like, I don't care about the money. That's what I said from day one. I would fight him for $1 just to make the contract legal. And I think that installs so much confidence in me that that's what scares him, is like, why does this guy want to fight me for $1? I'm going to get my butt kicked. And that's kind of what happened, to be honest.
Is there any specific reason that you challenged him in particular?
No, not at all. I thought the fan base was great. I never thought he would fight in the UFC. I got a deal a long time ago with me and him on an NBC show. My manager was pushing every show here at Legacy, wanted to fight Punk on Legacy, and Mick actually is the matchmaker now for UFC. So everybody wanted to see this fight, and I picked him because I like the guy. I picked him because I said, man, he's got a huge fan base, and he wants to fight. I don't want to pick a guy who doesn't want to fight and convince them he wants to fight. So I said, hey, that's perfect. Perfect. He's 38. I don't care. I'm 43. It's like, who cares? If he sits there and calls me an old man, well, you're getting old too, buddy. So, I never thought he would be in the UFC, because the UFC strives for perfection. Like, there's so many people that fight to get into the UFC. Out of like 600 UFC fighters, CM Punk is listed at like 170 top paid UFC fighter with only one fight. Now you got, 300, 400, 500, 600 people that are struggling, that are really good fighters that, could use the money or earn the money. And so I was just thinking, fan base loves it. All these things started coming out, and then I talked to him about it, and he's like, yeah. And then he started saying he's a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, and then I started believing him, and then all this stuff started coming out, thinking, I don't know if he's just saying that to impress me at the time, or he actually never thought this could possibly ever happen with us. And it was very possible. But I like the guy. I like CM Punk. I just like to show the world who is the best in the world, and that's why me and him should fight, to say who is best in the world, to own that slogan. I know WWE owns it, but I'm just saying.
Hey, this is Walter Emmanuel Jones, also known as Zach, the original Black Ranger. Hey, you listen to Primo Nutmeg, an interesting podcast for interesting people. And, this is Walter Jones. You know what time it is. It's Morphin time all day, every day.
After the second season, you and Austin St. John and Tui, you left the show. Could you speak a little bit to why you three left at that time, all at the same time?
Well, basically, the show had done very well the first season. Hamzaban, who created the show, who brought the show from Japan to the States and decided to make an American version of the show. He made $1 billion in the first year, which is a huge success. $1 billion. That's with a B. And then we had our second season, and it continued to be a non-union show. And then he was all excited because Fox was going to do a movie. And he sat down and talked to us about it and said, hey, we got contracts with Fox. They're going to do a big, huge movie. This is exciting. It's going to be amazing. The fans are going to go crazy. But we need you guys to sign new contracts. So here's the contracts. And the contract was for three movies, and 40 more episodes, another season. And it was all non-union. And it was like, after making that much and doing so well with the show, and the show being the #1 hit, we just felt like we needed to get supervision in regards to the contract. So we got a lawyer, we talked to a lawyer, we tried to make the show SAG, and it didn't work out. And so we ended up moving.
So what was that like once you left the show and when that movie came out? Was that difficult for you, or did you just kind of forget about the Power Rangers for a while?
No, bro, it was so hard. It was like, I really wanted to do the movie. I really wanted to be on the show. I was loving it. I was having a great time. I just felt like I needed to stand up for what I believed in, what was right. At that time we were not. It was a non-union show. So I'll put it like this. you know, with all the merchandise and all the things and, you know, the comic books and the toys and the pogs, everything with my likeness, I wasn't making any money on. And so it didn't feel fair. And that movie was something that was built up because of us. And then have 3 people step in and do the movie, the thing that we had worked to achieve, was disheartening for me. You know, it was hard. It's like my biggest regret these days is the fact that I didn't do the movie. I wish, in retrospect, that I had done the movie and then ended it. I mean, not that I wanted to end it anyway, but if I had at least done the movie, that would have made me happy, because I felt like that was the piece, the cap of what we had achieved, you know.
Right.
Like, that would have capped it off really nice. But, you know, it's all good.
Hey, everybody, this is David Yost, the original Mighty Morphin Blue Power Ranger, and you are listening to Primo Nutmeg, an interesting podcast for very interesting people.
Sorry to touch on sore subjects, but I just have to ask, because there is a new movie coming out, big budget motion picture, and Bryan Cranston is in the movie as Zordon. Your character on the show, Billy Cranston, was actually named after him. A few years ago, there was, I guess, you know, something kind of rude that he said in public, where he referred to your character as the Fey One. But he's apologized since then. I just want to know, are you on good terms with Bryan Cranston, or do you still kind of resent that comment?
I mean, I don't know Bryan Cranston whatsoever. We maybe met once way back while we were on Power Rangers crossing paths. But I mean, I can respect him as an actor. The comment, though, you know, it doesn't make any sense. And I don't know that, you know, the only thing I'll say to that is, for me, Faye is the way. So if somebody wants to think that it's a problem, as he stated in his comments, that's his business. But you know, I am who I am. I don't necessarily think his comment was about my character, because it doesn't make sense to my character. And all the people that write to me and tell me, he didn't mean it the way that you're making it sound. He meant it literally. Like, if you look up the word Faye literally in the dictionary, I think it means something like jovial. So if that's truly the case, if he meant it literal, why would he say that that's a problem? I mean, his comment was, he's the Faye One, that's the problem. So it just doesn't make sense. It's a very rude comment, and he's apologized, so to speak, through his, I don't know, his manager or somebody, and that's fine. I accept his apology. But, you know, it just, for me, it should be evidence to people that this is sort of the stuff that I went through when I was on the TV show. So it's just those little jabs, those backhanded comments that aren't necessary, but those are things that I would hear all the time. And that's what caused me to leave the TV show, because it's like, who wants to go to work when people are making dumb comments like that on a consistent basis?
Hey, it's Amy Jo Johnson on Primo Nutmeg. Here I am, Pink Power Ranger. Woohoo!
And it was strange watching back then, because when Austin, Walter, and Twee left all at the same time, it seemed to really change the dynamic of the show. Could you speak to why you didn't leave with them?
You know, like I said, I was super naive, and I just was like, well, I got my first job. I didn't even have an agent. I didn't even really know what the union was. I didn't understand the whole real true dynamics of what was going on. And then when they wanted to leave because they wanted the show to become union, I just didn't feel comfortable at that time in the age I was and what I knew. I think I didn't even have an agent yet, of what I would be fighting for to leave for that. And so I didn't jump on board of leaving to make, I mean, they asked for the show to become union and said they wouldn't work anymore unless the show was union. And then Haim just went, okay, bye. And basically he's proven that that's fine, because it's, you know, it was like Menudo in a way, you know, like the band back in the 80s, I think, where you can just keep on changing the cast members out, and that worked, and it has worked for 20 years. I think they're still airing the damn show. I mean, making the show. so that was fine, you know. So I just wasn't prepared or ready to make a stand of something I didn't even know what I would be standing up for.
I also spoke with 2 comic book legends, Jim Steranko, and Dan Jurgens.
So I would say that you revolutionized comic books in the 1970s.
Really? Tell me more.
Well, with Nick Fury, I would say in particular, that changed the comic book landscape. What was it like working on Nick Fury, and what was the reaction that you got at the time when those books came out?
Well, the most immediate reaction was from my peers and my bosses at Marvel. I can tell you that almost every new and different idea, I call them innovations, that I brought in literally was a minor altercation or a fight about it, because Stan knew what was commercial. He is the quintessential editor, and I continued to break the rules. That's what innovations and ideas are about. And whenever I'd break those rules, I'd get a comment from Stan like, "Oh my God, Jim, why can't you just do it like Kirby or Romita?" Well, the reason is there's only one Jack Kirby.
Right.
And it would be an offense to even, copy his work and try to be Kirby, because he's the warrior god of comics and the rest of us aren't. All I could be is myself. And the backstory is that at that time when I got into comics, I was an art director at an ad agency with a big salary. When I got into comics, virtually lint, chump change by comparison. Now, I kept that job for a while. I also had a secondary job playing rock and roll. From the time I was 18 to 30, I worked the tri-state area in the Northeast, playing 3, 4, 5 jobs a night, every night, sometimes out of town, often out of state. So at that time, I was doing a comic book a month, full-time job, working at the ad agency 8 to 5, full-time job, playing 3 to 5 nights a week. It's a full-time job.
It's impressive.
Work was a 4-letter word.
So, again, Nick Fury was really something that changed comic books, and then you worked on Captain America as well. How was working on Captain America different than Nick Fury?
It was very different. For one thing, when I was just a kid, little kid, reading comics, Captain America was my favorite character. How can you not love America's super patriot?
Right.
And when I did him, he was my favorite character. And to this very day, right now, he's still my favorite character. As you may know, I did 12 variant Captain America covers for Marvel last year. So, still working on that character. The nostalgic quality of developing and making, charting part of Captain America's legend was a very fulfilling thing for me. I only did 3 issues of Cap, but I think they changed the nature of how the character was perceived along the way. Back in, maybe that was the late 60s, 68, I did the death of Captain America. Remember, they did it again, like 40 years later.
Right.
So I think I was 40 years ahead of my time.
I would say so.
Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., was done in a kind of like pop art style. Comic books are very embracing. I think you can get away with almost anything, and if it doesn't work, you get it right the next month. It's as simple as that. So the idea of experimenting, particularly with that strip that was very open and liberal for new ideas, was a natural for me. Captain America had a more well-developed format, more rigid, because Captain America had a significant history And those are guidelines that we had to maintain. But S.H.I.E.L.D. was all new. If you remember, Nick Fury started as the leader of the Howling Commandos. He was in World War II.
Yep.
Along the way, Lee and Kirby decided to make him the head of S.H.I.E.L.D. And in those early books, he was like a foxhole commando. He had wrinkled clothes and 5 o'clock shadow and a stub of a cigar. I mean, he looked like Boxcar Willie on crack. So the first thing I did when I took over was I took him to my barber. I shaved him. I took him to my tailor. I gave him some good threads. And I even gave him my apartment. You remember in one of my books, I did a one-page love scene with a countess? No words? No words, because some woman told me a long time ago, Jim, there's a time for words and a time for silence. And she was right. And I used it in that particular page. So I think I had the opportunity to develop a certain kind of characterization in Nick Fury. I can tell you this, and maybe most people don't realize it. You would not like to spend the night hanging out with Nick Fury, because it would probably end with you in a hospital. He's a very dangerous guy. Don't go there if you don't have to.
So again, you've worked on a lot of comic books over the years, a lot of different characters. Are there any characters who you didn't get the chance to work on who you would have liked to have?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me that question, because over the period of 30, 40 years, I have developed over 100 characters which I keep in my theater of concepts. And I'm hoping one by one at this point to bring them to life in comic books, TV, and digital games, and maybe in film.
Awesome, yeah, fans would love that, I have to say, speaking as a fan.
Keep an eye out for them, and when we get to that point, you get the first interview.
Awesome.
When that idea first came up to kill off Superman, was it intended to play out the way that it eventually did play out in the comics, where it was about a year-long arc, and you had the funeral for a friend, and then you had these different Supermen, claiming to be the true Superman? Was that originally the intent? Was it supposed to be for a longer period, a shorter period, or were different things supposed to happen? Just how did that original concept morph into what eventually came into being?
First, in terms of how that came together as a particular story, it's something that had come up before. A lot of times what would happen is we'd get together in a conference room and we'd throw out story ideas. And sometimes, we would go back to famous Superman stories, Superman Red, Superman Blue, and for whatever reason it wasn't the right time to pursue. And I know I had a couple of things I wanted to do as we went into that conference, and I had written down on a legal pad Death of Superman, and another one, Monster Trashes Metropolis. And that was, in part, my eternal frustration with writing Superman villains, which tended to be, non-superpowered characters. And they were, even Brainiac at that time was sort of a thought-oriented, brainy-type guy, as was Luthor, as, Prankster was a, normal human being type stuff. And I just wanted physical confrontations. I wanted stuff for Superman to fight. And as we came up with the story, we talked about it wouldn't be enough just to do a story called The Death of Superman. You had to deal with what would Superman's death mean. And obviously, when we see someone die, we talk about who they were and what they meant to us at that point. And we then explore what will their absence mean to us. If it's a recording artist or, a musician or somebody like that, you realize I'll never have the benefit of new music from that individual again. If it's Superman, you start to realize that will never have the benefit of his presence again, whether it is as an inspirational figure, whether it is as a savior, whatever it might be. So in that discussion of Death of Superman, it wasn't just talking about the death of Superman. It was talking about loss. And to explore that idea of loss, Superman had to be gone. So we decided we would do Death of Superman. Superman would die in Superman 75, and then we would publish 2 months of books called World Without a Superman, in which we dealt with his funeral and the sense of loss that the world would feel without having a Superman, and that would be it. And this is where DC made, I think, an incredibly courageous decision. They said, okay, and at that point we'll stop publishing Superman comics. So once we planned that story, we had decided that there would be 2 more months of Superman comics, and then that would be it. And we walked out of that room and all went home without knowing how the hell Superman was going to come back or exactly when he was going to come back. We honestly had no plans at that point. We just knew we're doing Death of Superman, then we do 2 more months of issues, and at that point everyone's thinking, hey, well, I'm going to get a break because there are no more Superman comics. Obviously, the story then turned into this big, huge attraction, was getting all sorts of attention, and the sort of idea became then that whatever we did in terms of bringing Superman back, however it was going to happen, it had to be special. So, by now it's a couple months down the road, right? And we still don't know exactly how or when, although we were starting to hone in on kind of an April release. Death of Superman happened in November. And we were sitting in a room, and it's like each creative team had its own idea of how to bring Superman back. Roger Stern might have had one. Carl Kiesel, who had stepped in for Jerry Ordway, might have had some thoughts. Louis Simonson may have had some thoughts. I had some. We threw around different ideas, and nothing we were looking at excited the entire room. And basically, we had gotten to the point where we had talked about, say, 4 different ideas, and Weezy just at that point said, oh, gosh, it's too bad we can't do all 4 of them. And that then started the discussion that said, well, what if we did? And that took us into the development of the 4 Superman characters. It was like, what could they be? Well, one could be John Henry Irons. Another one could be Superboy. The other one could be, the Krypton Man, if you will, the Eradicator, which we had seen earlier in the stories. And I said, well, one could be a cyborg. And, oh, by the way, if we do it, what if he's a bad guy instead of 4 good guys? So it was and I'm sorry for the long answer, but I wanted to portray that it's not like story ideas come out of the blue and they're fully baked. It takes a lot of work and a lot of conversation to massage that idea and get it to the point where it's something that works for everybody. And I really think that was where our true triumph came, that when we came back with the 4 Supermen, that's what took everybody by surprise. And that whole idea that we then took that and turned it into, or took the Death of Superman and turned it into a much bigger adventure, is what really made the whole thing work. And I've said this before, and I'll be candid about it. I don't think we ever got the legitimate recognition we deserved in terms of the story quality of that entire exercise from start to finish.
And I would agree with you. I mean, I do think that was one of the greatest story arcs in comic book history, if not the greatest. Just the way that did play out over the course of that year.
If I could just jump in, I really think if you take Death of Superman, World Without a Superman, and then the Return of Superman, put that all together as one epic saga, I think in terms of superhero comics, that's about as good as it gets. I defy anyone to do something as big as that, better than that. And at that time, part of the problem is that I think we were getting ripped for, just trying to sell 1 million comic books and doing a marketing stunt, when none of that was true. We were, right from day one, only concerned with trying to tell a good story. And we did it as well as we possibly could have. And as I said, because of its success, I don't think we ever got the project got the recognition it should have as being really good fucking superhero comics.
I've also had conversations on religion with a leading secularist and a well-known television evangelist.
If you have people kind of deciding or governing on their own what is right or wrong, doesn't that create some kind of broad existential chaos for society?
Doesn't seem to appear that way. Wherever people are secular right now, secular democracies, no societal chaos. You have great human connections. People are taking care of the elderly, the sick, the young, the babies, the homeless. So where people are no longer reading the Bible at all, they've created some really the most moral societies on earth. Look at Japan. Japan doesn't even have the Bible in its history. This is a Buddhist Shinto society. There's been no influence of the Bible at all. Oh my God, they have the lowest murder rates in the world. So this Christian notion that the Bible is some like objective source of morality is quite frankly childish. I mean, no one can just read the Ten Commandments. Anybody who reads the Ten Commandments and think that's good morals. I mean, the Ten Commandments allows for slavery. I mean, the Ten Commandments objectify women. I mean, it's so weird when people come at me with this, because I'm just like, have you read the Bible? I mean, the Bible condones murder, it condones genocide, it condones rape. I mean, it's no and the notion that the Bible, it's so obviously written by people. So anyone who says, well, I get my objectives from the Bible, that all you're saying is I get my morals from ancient Israelite culture from 5,000 to 3,000 years ago, and the people living there tell me how to live. Like, there's no indication that the Bible comes from some magic invisible deity at all. And even if it did, that would reduce all morality to obedience. We would just be whatever the sky god tells us we do. And we know that that's really ridiculous. I mean, if the sky god tells us to kill our own children with a knife, do we do it? According to the Bible, yes. If God tells Abraham to kill his son, he must do it. And that's where secular morality really shows its maturity. We're not into blind obedience. Secular morality is not following orders. Whether it's a sergeant telling us to shoot children in Vietnam, the secular sensibility can say, no, I'm not just going to follow orders. Just because you have authority doesn't dictate how I should behave. So whether it's a sergeant telling us what to do, a teacher telling us what to do, or an invisible magic deity who creates universes, it really doesn't matter to us. Might does not create right. I mean, that's the irony about the Christian worldview of morality. They'll say, well, might creates right. God is so mighty, he must be right. But, Plato, 2,300 years ago, wrote a dialogue called the Euthyphro dialogue, and it really cuts to the core of the whole notion. And it says, does God command things that are moral because they're moral, or in other words, does he see that they're moral and therefore he commands them, or do they become moral when he commands them? And both of those are problems, right? If God can recognize the morality in certain actions and thus commands them, that means morality exists outside of God. He just happens to perceive it. If things become moral when God commands them, that means morality is arbitrary. God could command us to rape, which he does in the Bible, by the way, and then rape would be moral. And if raping is moral, and God commands the Israelites to kill babies, is that moral? Well, it does if God commands it. So suddenly morality doesn't really have any meaning. It's just whatever God says. So for the secular sensibility, religious Christian morality really is reduced to obedience. I will obey. I will obey my sky master. If you think obedience is how to be moral, you don't understand morality. Morality is about adhering to one's inner conscience. Morality is about making tough decisions in the face of difficult choices. Morality is about looking at the suffering and well-being of others. And am I going to alleviate that suffering or increase that suffering? So I never understood how, well, I get my morals from the Bible. Oh, really? Which one? Show me the morals in the Bible that you adhere to. And do you adhere to them because they're good, or do you adhere to them just because they are what they are? And if they were something different, you'd adhere to that too. It's almost I call it moral outsourcing, right? The real true Christian approach to morality is saying, I can't make up my own mind about that suffering of others. I just follow what the invisible sky God tells me what to do. Well, that's not morality. That's abdicating moral deliberation, actually. That's moral outsourcing. And in terms of, if it's just subjective, well, I don't really, what else could it be? Is eating a dog, is it okay to eat a dog or not? How can there be an objective rule about that? some people are going to say, yes, it's fine to eat dogs. Some people are going to say, no, that's not. And you're telling me that, like, we can look up in the sky and in golden letters it's going to say, like, yes, it's okay to eat dog, and that would convince us? Couldn't you still argue with that precept? So of course morality at root has to be subjective, just like love. Can someone tell you who to love? God told me to love this person. Well, I guess I have to. Or, I mean, art is subjective. The deep things that mean that make up human civilization are intrinsically subjective, and I don't see how that makes them any worse or any bad. I mean, I love my wife not in an objective sense, but in a subjective sense, and it's the most important relationship in my life. So someone could say to me, well, your love for your wife is not objective, so, oh, yeah, you're right, I guess I shouldn't love her. If I see children getting kicked in the face, I have an instinct, an impulse, a belief that is wrong. Well, that's subjective. A Nazi could, like, love that. Yay, let's kick Jewish children in the face. How can I objectively convinced? I can't. There's no objective basis for morality. What we have is experience. We have brains that allow for empathy. We have a bioevolutionary development as in group dynamics. We have a natural predilection for care and altruism, and we have an ability to know what it feels like to be on the receiving end of viciousness. And these are the things that we construct our morality out of. And we're going to disagree, and cultures are going to have different ideas about what is good and what is wrong, and all we can do is talk and discuss and debate and experience and live and learn and progress. I mean, whenever someone says to me, I'm almost done ranting here, whenever someone says to me, like, well, I've got the Bible, I'm like, well, let's look at the Ten Commandments and compare them to the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1948. There's no way you could think that the Ten Commandments were superior to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1948. I mean, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights are so much more superior morally than the Ten Commandments. And the Ten Commandments supposedly come from God. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights we know came from people. And so I would just ask anybody to put those two documents side by side, and you tell me which is the more just, more humane, and more ethical. And so to me, there goes the whole notion that, there's a magic, ancient book from an invisible sky god that tells us how to live, which is such an absurd approach to how we should treat each other.
I know that the overwhelming majority of atheists do seem to advocate subjectivism, but there does seem to be a minority who do advocate for objective morality. One of them that I can think of in particular is Ayn Rand. She advocated for objectivism, and it seems like it does kind of make sense how one could hold on that viewpoint. So if morality was something like any other kind of physical law, like gravity or something like that, and it just existed independent of any person deciding it, then couldn't morality just be something as simple as gravity? There are things that are right and are wrong, and that's just the nature of reality itself.
Well, yes, you can maintain that position, but that is a humongous leap of faith, because scientifically you cannot prove a value. Logically, you cannot prove a value. You see, as soon as you talk about values or morals, you are out of science and you're into philosophy and theology. So that is why I would argue that if you posit that the basis of morality is reason, then the question is whose reason? I can promise you there were very good reasons that Adolf Hitler instituted the Holocaust. I totally disagree with them. But he had his reasons, and he was no dummy, and the people who followed him were no dummies. I abhor the irrational nature of their reasons, but that's obviously my perspective. Obviously, they had a opposite perspective. So to try and posit that moral absolutes exist because of human reason is very flimsy, because the question becomes, whose reason are you appealing to? And very rational people disagree for very rational reasons when it comes to morality.
But couldn't you expand it past that to be something along the lines of life is an objectively good thing and reality trends towards life, especially on Earth where you have all these different biospheres develop and whatnot? I mean, couldn't you just use that as a baseline to say, because reality has created life, reality, if it can bend towards life and can create life, and that seems to be what it's striving towards, then isn't everything that preserves, protects, and defends life an objectively good thing, and everything that destroys life and acts against it is a bad thing?
Well, I think you're going to have to consider then survival of the fittest, preservation of the most powerful. I think when you go out into nature and sit by a stream and watch a praying mantis, female praying mantis, devour the head of the male praying mantis as they mate, when you watch a little bug land on the head of a frog, inject venom into the frog's head, and then the frog's insides turn to mush, I think what you begin to realize is that life is not good. And that if you're going to posit that life is good, you're going to have to acknowledge, wow, but there's an awful lot of death and destruction, and why is life good and death and destruction evil?
It's also been an honor for me to have many musicians on the show, including Rock and Roll Hall of Famer Donovan.
Bringing you back then to the 60s, you were one of the first pop musicians to really embrace the counterculture. So what happened personally for you where you started getting involved in this flower power scene?
Well, I come from what they called the underground in the 60s, and before that it was called the Bohemian world. The Bohemian world of art schools, the Bohemian world of poetry groups and jazz and blues clubs. In that world, we we read a lot of books. Out of the art schools came everything that was going to happen. I believe in America too, certainly in Europe, and definitely in Britain. Because in art school, the girls were more interesting in art school. The boys were more interesting to the girls. But it was more than that. In art school was everything. It was jazz and blues and folk. There was poetry, painting, and pottery. There was philosophy, literature, and yoga, and books. And lots of the books that we read of the old Bohemians, they spoke of yoga and Buddhism and the power of the inner world of the human being, which was entered by meditation. And it was the Beatles and I especially saw in each other's songs that we were headed in the same direction to try to study what was going on. And one of the actual symbols of the Eastern form of yoga is the awakening of enlightenment and consciousness. The higher consciousness is symbolized by the unfolding flower. But flower power, the actual phrase, was coined, I believe, by Allen Ginsberg to illustrate the unfolding of the higher consciousness, which was the 60s theme, really, when you look at it closely. But at a concert, I had 7,000 blue iris flowers in a mandala on stage in Hollywood Bowl in 1967, and I do believe that's when they coined me the Prince of Flower Power.
I really want to play. It's Amber Dreams, right? That's the title.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I really like to play just a little bit of that. I know it's 12 minutes long, so we can't play the whole thing.
Really
but before we play it, just set the scenery again. You wrote this after you woke up from a dream.
Yeah, it was a little bit of like a personal time in my life at the period of when I wrote it. But I had a dream about someone, and she was like going through like a really like bad time, and I think the dream was of me being in her shoes. It was super weird. I've kind of felt like a girl, and I was in a girl's shoes, and she was going through like just rough shit, addiction, abuse, mental, bullshit. And when I woke up, I felt like I was that person, but myself at the same time. And it was just like it was really weird.
So you woke up, you go over to the piano, and you wrote this song?
Yeah.
Wow.
Straight up. I literally was in my boxers, just to set this scene for you. I was in my Black Panther boxers. Not the civil rights group, but the Marvel superhero group. They were not leather, and there was not a fist on the front or back of them. I was in my Black Panther boxers, and I was just zoned out, and I was looking out the window. It's just maybe like 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, and I don't know if you're like me, where once you get up, if you're that hype, you can't go back to sleep. Right. And I think I tried to go back into the dream. Like, you ever go back to sleep and you're like, damn, I I know I can get back to that beach with Cindy Crawford. I know I can, but you can't. Nope. And I just got up and I was like, yo, I gotta play this. And I just put the record button on Reason because I didn't want to go back and ever redo it. I just wanted to play it straight through.
So this is like a rough cut. This is like a one-time deal.
100%.
Wow. That's pretty 100%. Awesome. It's a great song. All right, well, let's listen to this amazing inspiration from Camouflage.
Thanks.
As somebody who's never written music before, I'm kind of intrigued by the process because, you know, when you're writing like words, you know, you can have a general idea and then you can kind of piece it out and you could add more depth here or there. But when you're writing music, you're making noises, right? So do you start like making those noises and then piecing it together, or how does just seriously, how does that work like from the beginning to putting the song together?
Yeah, well, I'll answer that as best I can, but I by no means am answering for every musician ever.
Sure.
I know that this is such a precious thing.
Answer for every musician who's ever lived.
This is such a precious topic for musicians that I wouldn't dare speak on behalf of anybody but myself. But for Colors, or for myself or my partner in the band. His name is Morgan. It's a really unusual process. Like I said, it becomes much more formulated than flow state. We look at our album and we decipher what kind of songs we want on this album, what kind of moods we want to invoke.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's totally like, okay, we're gonna make this kind of album. It needs to have this kind of flow to it.
Yeah. So even from the opening few bars of the album to the last word of the album, was all really strategic for us. I think,
awesome.
Yeah. The opening words of the album are just vocals saying, "Hey, you." It's this declarative, attention-seeking statement that I think was really important for us. And so that's sort of where we start, is this, what we want to achieve throughout this album, and then from there we'll pick select songs. So we want songs to invoke a romanticism in somebody. We want songs to invoke a sort of pride, or not necessarily anger, but a self-value over, let's say, something that they have been a little bit maliced towards in the past, whether it's a relationship or their parents, or whatever it is, themselves. Maybe they're just mad at themselves. Some sort of uplifting song, something romantic or heartbreaking, whatever it might be. I think it's important to sort of hit the nose on all those core emotions. I think humans are driven by two core emotions, and I'm completely probably going to sound like a moron when I try to articulate this, but I always have it in my head, but I've never really tried to verbalize it before. But I think fear and love, or fear and affection, I guess, or fear and sensuality, fear and sex, if you will, I guess you could say. I think those two core emotions influence everyone's decision in everything they do, and those are the things we wanted to hit on in the album, and those are the things we want to hit on in the music videos we do, and everything we do. We want to hit on those two emotions, sometimes simultaneously. I think that's when it becomes really fun for us, is if we can make you feel uneasy, but also make you feel excited.
Do you have a song that we can play here of yours?
Yeah.
Because I would like not only to play it here, but I'd like to play it in our yearly kind of retrospective.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that at some point. I just released my first EP this year, and
you did?
also 2 other tracks.
So you are DJing.
Well, I'm producing. I'm
Okay.
still releasing music, but I'm not DJing as much. Because
Okay.
DJing is like getting gigs in LA is a whole other thing, and it's
I see.
you pay to play, and I'm not trying to make it as a DJ anymore. Like, I had my time in the sun. Now I just, like, I've always made music. I love making music, so I'll always make music. And if that ever propels me to like some sort of level, great. But if not, I'll just always be making music, always releasing it.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
It's like this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. So like, I make music because I love to, and I can't not. So that's always going to be a thing. But am I going to have to play in these shady bars and beg for an opening slot and then not get paid? That's the thing I'm not really doing much anymore.
Gotcha. All right. Well, let's hear one of your songs. Which song would you like the listeners to listen to right now?
I'm going to play a song I call Sunset.
Awesome. All right. We'll be right back.
I just stepped out of Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus in Hartford, Connecticut. The last such appearance of the circus there. For over 140 years, the circus has played an important part in the American consciousness. It has showed us silliness, wild animals, racial stereotypes. It is sadistic, masochistic. But at the end of the day, there's really been nothing more American than the circus. Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey has a long, long history. And it's always been there. Through wars and depressions, through good times and bad, we've always had the circus. No matter what was happening on a national level or in our own personal lives, we could have faith that eventually the circus would come to town. As Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey puts on its last show in New York this month, many of the headlines are going to be the same. The circus is over. The circus will not come to town anymore. The circus has been defeated. But all of those headlines could not be more wrong. For the truth is, the circus will always be with us. The circus is us. The circus has become one with the American psyche and spirit. It's true that we don't go to the circus as much as we used to. In fact, at the age of 31, this was my first time going. But even for my first time, it couldn't have been more familiar. Because, at the end of the day, this is something that I had experienced my entire life. The circus is everywhere. Music is the circus. Television is the circus. Politics, literature, cuisine. Hell, even the telephone has become the circus. The internet is, more than anything else, the circus. The truth is, we don't have to go to the circus anymore because the circus is everywhere. The circus is everything. We've embraced the circus. Baseball games, professional wrestling, football, golf. Every aspect of our lives, from our work to our dreams, is the circus. America, Western society, and the global financial system is the circus. It's true, P.T. Barnum has been dead for over a century, but that still doesn't stop him from being the current president of the United States. And for his final act, he may put on the ultimate fireworks show, global thermonuclear warfare, with any and all comers. Hey everybody, welcome to another exciting edition of Primo Nutmeg. By the way, if you are a regular listener, please do subscribe to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On today's show, I have a very special guest. Who's that? Robo-Claus? Robo-Claus, what are you doing here? I wasn't expecting
Merry Christmas, Stephen.
It is Christmas, isn't it?
It is. Are you feeling the spirit?
A little bit, not really. I mean, I'm just not feeling the Christmas spirit this year.
Maybe you need a present. I'm here delivering Christmas presents.
You are?
What do you want for Christmas?
Well, Robo-Claus, there's something I've been really wanting all year, but it seems like it's not going to happen, and, I've moved on, so it's not.
No, Stephen, don't give up hope. Christmas is about hope and life and love. What do you want for Christmas? Tell me. Tell Robo-Claus.
Well, Robo-Claus, there was a show I used to listen to, and actually inspired me to make this podcast. And I listened to it all the time. One time when I was driving through the Appalachian Mountains, I was listening to it. The other day, I was listening to the first episode. But it doesn't exist anymore, so it's not even worth really talking about. I mean...
You say it doesn't exist? Something of myth, perhaps? Lost in time?
Yeah, there was this show called the RoboCast, and they had some great guests. In fact, I was on, Jack LaRosa's on, Nick Constant, Matt Roth, Matt Patterson, but
I don't know.
See the twinkle in my eye? Robocast is yours.
What?
A brand new Robocast.
There's going to be another
2017
Robocast?
emerging
No,
from
Roboclaws.
hibernation.
It can't be. There can't be
It is
another
true.
Robocast.
It will be gold wrapped and gifted to you right on your doorstep. Folks, it's coming.
Well, Roboclaws, I wasn't expecting that. I can't believe it. Thank you so much. You made my Christmas.
Oh, you are welcome, but it is nothing. It is the season of giving. It is Christmas. Ho, 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 ho! Get it!
I did see a great Hoarders. I want to see the full episode. It was just like a clip. And it was one of those things, actually, I never click. It was like, you know, the little ads, like suggested videos underneath, like a Facebook video or whatever.
Right.
I never touch those things. But there was one, it was like about best hoard ever or something. And it said poop on the bottom of it. I'm like, oh, this lady hoards poop. I got to see this. Was that the jugs? The dirty water? Yeah. That was disgusting.
Are we talking human feces or is this like all kinds of like a rainbow?
You
feces?
just saw it again.
Yeah, so basically there was this hoarder, quote unquote, really just crazy person, totally crazy, who was like living with her mother in their house, and the toilet stopped working about 10 years ago. So they were pooping in a bucket, and then the bucket gets too full. So she ladles the poop out into a smaller bucket and then pours it into juice container.
Ghost. The you guys can't hear because you don't have the headphones on.
Sorry, what?
We had a ghost appearance.
Could I hear it?
I can't. Well, I'm very glad that the ghost made a birthday appearance. That was nice. So, Jack, why would somebody want to hoard poop?
I don't know, but it was great. She had bottles and bottles of dirty water, as she called it, her and her mom. And then when the poop bucket got too full, they would just go dump it out in the backyard.
Yep.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah, it went beyond, somebody who's like attached to a bunch of stuff. Like it went on to like, it's got to be like a fetish. Like when something gets that bad, like you have to wonder if it's like someone's got some kind of like, a certain amount of perverse pleasure out of the whole.
Oh, she loved it.
Yeah, I mean, she was cooking, eating, sleeping, living.
In the poop.
In this like stock room of poo-filled milk jug.
It became ceremonial, the ladling of the poop.
Yeah. It's just a whole.
Well, the guy said there was like old tampons on the floor and stuff too. It was just like garbage everywhere. And she was like,
so gross.
They're like, you have contaminated food in your house. He's like, well, can I just eat a little of the contaminated food before I go? It's like a last. It's like a last rush. They're like, why would you want to eat fecal contaminated food? She was just like, I don't know. Like,
she totally had become.
She's like incredulous. Like, why wouldn't you want to eat?
It's all I have left.
There's got to be a point in her life where maybe she like went out after dark and went to some clearing in the woods where some kind of malevolent like fungus troll spirit like infested her body and turned her into this like weirdo.
That's a good theory.
Because like that happens.
You're gonna be a duty girl.
Like the fucking Kandarian demon in Evil Dead, like like flying around in the woods, and she's just out there, and someone's calling into her, but she doesn't understand, and this thing just goes inside her body and turns her into this fucking shit demon.
I can tell you one thing right now. It's not the government. The alien being is from another dimension. All right. If you look at any typical abduction, a UFO abduction, it's very, very similar. They'll be laying in bed. Neither a being comes into their room, or multiple beings, or it's a light flashes. First, it usually always starts with a light flashing in the room. You see that, and then all of a sudden, like, you just feel disturbed. The body, like, human mind is going on a set of, I feel disturbed. What the fuck is here? Like, it knows that there's something that's wrong. And it sets off, like, the alien, like, I had this conversation with Jack tonight. So, you're sitting in bed, and you feel, what's going on. Like all of a sudden there could be something coming, or a light will shine through the room. In most abduction cases, light shines through the room, and then there's beings in the room, and then you can't move. You can't move at all. You're still, and then they take you. But they really don't take you. It's your mind. So your mind is going crazy, like. But these people, like the Greys, you've heard of obviously the Greys, right?
Yes.
Okay. So the Greys will take you into their ship, but they're only taking you to another dimension. How can a fucking force, like from most alien abduction, I've studied like this shit a lot, believe it or not. Like you might think I'm crazy, but I really have. And most cases are, they took me through the window, and all of a sudden, like I was in a ship and I was seeing the different universes and blah blah blah, and I'm just like, no, you were taken to the demon world where you had to do it. They did experiments on you because that's exactly what they do, and then at the same time, like they're just telling you what you want to hear. They're just demons. That's all they are. So, Beck, it's hard to explain. So, like, if you look through cultures, the pyramids and everything, ancient alien shit, okay? The Greys are a being that, like, is beyond a being. They are something you don't ever want to cross. It'll, like, literally, as long as you're living, I think. I honestly believe they're just from another, like UFOs and all those sightings, they're just from another dimension, from the dimension of hell. And they just come and visit us. They look around and they make sure that everything that they want is checked in place. And then they say, and it says in the Bible, a being will come down and be the savior. And everyone will follow him, and he who doesn't follow him will die. It says that. Do you know about that, Steve? I mean,
yeah, I've read the Bible a few times.
I'm just saying. So everything's starting to make sense.
What is that piano sound? Is that your phone?
Yes.
It's very eerie. It's good. It's adding to the Mr. Crowley in the background.
But on less depressing shit, let's talk about some fucking great shit. All right, me and Steve, we're getting fucking drunk. Fuck
Although
yeah.
There is a demon on the beer that we're drinking. Perhaps the greatest blessing that I've had over the past year is also having the honor of interviewing some of the greatest minds in economics. So if we can go dig back into history a little bit, the U.S. actually had two central banks before the Federal Reserve, and we don't hear too much about the abolition of the first U.S. bank, but the second U.S. bank, which was abolished under Andrew Jackson, and that was really a major theme of his administration, was the abolition of the second U.S. bank. After that bank was done away with, there was a financial panic in 1837, and that often gets blamed on the abolition of the second U.S. bank.
That's the bankers' stance. They want to discredit any kind of system or activity that will take their power away. I wrote about that in one chapter in my book, The End of Money and the Future of Civilization. It was called Andrew Jackson and the Bank War. And Andrew Jackson single-handedly killed the second bank of the United States because Nicholas Biddle, who was the president of the second bank, the central bank at the time, had enough support in Congress to get the recharter bill passed through Congress. And people ought to read Andrew Jackson's veto message to understand what was going on at the time. Jackson realized that the money power was a separate government in and of itself. Because when you think about it, whoever controls money controls the economy, which allows them to control everything else. And so it was an intentional action on the part of Biddle and the central bank at that time to crash the economy in retaliation for Jackson's veto. And when businesses complained and came to Jackson, Jackson said, well, you should be talking to Biddle, not to me. He's the one that's responsible for crashing the economy.
I've heard you say that you support the gold standard quite a bit, but from sort of a libertarian or voluntarist perspective, having a gold standard, that's still the government kind of enforcing a monetary system on the populace. So wouldn't a free banking policy or just the absence of any policy, wouldn't that be preferable to having any sort of gold or bimetallic standard?
Yeah, and I think that should be the goal, and that's why I've introduced legislation over the years of competing currencies and repealing all legal tender laws and all taxation on the precious metals and on money, because the market should sort all this out. And generally it has. 6,000 years of history, the people generally have always gone to gold and silver as money and then used as a means of exchange. And the founders understood the importance of it. They knew what runaway inflation was like with the continental money, and therefore that's why they put it in the Constitution. So I think the goal that you mentioned is a good goal. That's where we should aim. But in the meantime, I think it's okay to argue the case that maybe we ought to just pay attention to what the law says. And our law, the Constitution, and the moral law is that you shouldn't have counterfeiters running a central bank in secrecy, printing up money and then passing it out to their friends and financing wars and welfare that's caused so much trouble. So that is a major issue. But, competing currencies, let the market decide, as long as there's no commission of fraud. And today we have a little bit of that. It's a controversial argument, but some people believe that's exactly what cryptocurrencies do, and Bitcoin serves as money. I have a fair amount of reservations about that being the ultimate money.
Why?
But I want it to be legal, but nobody can commit fraud. But here we have a system where the government commits the fraud, and they're the counterfeiters, and that's what we have to address.
Could you just explain for the listeners a little bit what exactly Dodd-Frank is, what it does, and your personal evaluation of Dodd-Frank?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that Dodd or Frank even read Dodd-Frank. I'm not sure that anybody on planet Earth, that's not true. There's an attorney who read all of Dodd-Frank, and it actually set
I hope somebody
her off
did.
on a mission. Well, look, what Dodd-Frank did is make bigger banks bigger, and it solidified too big to fail, which it was created to eradicate, but it didn't. And more importantly, for the next down cycle, it took away the motivation for banks to hold credit instruments on their balance sheet, whether it be an asset-backed security, a plain vanilla investment-grade corporate bond, a mortgage, you name it. Dodd-Frank disincentivized holding bonds on bank balance sheets, and that means that the next time there's a downturn in the market and all of these bond funds that have so proliferated are tested, especially ETF, exchange-traded funds that hold bonds, we will reset what illiquidity looks like when markets turn down because of Dodd-Frank.
I think libertarianism or voluntarism or what I'm advocating transcends the left-right paradigm, and it's really important that we see past that, because left and right really describe two different flavors of violence. It's, you're going to have violence for these ends or violence for these ends, or this flavor of violence or that flavor of violence. And libertarianism is the message or the worldview that's saying, like, no violence. We're all happier with no violence at all. How about that? And when you understand that, nonviolent relationships are always more conducive to human happiness than violent relationships, you go, wow, we really need to be doing better than this government thing. And, the potential that we have is being stifled by thinking that we have to turn to violence, that we have to turn to a taxation-based system. And so just to be clear, when I say violence, I mean everything that is backed up by coercion, everything that the state does. So when they say you owe this much in taxes, it's if you don't pay them, you go to jail. There's no, there's no way around it. Taxation is theft, unless you want to say the government owns you, which is probably worse because then it would be slavery. But because it's backed up by that violence, it's inherently detracting from our capacity to help each other. If, the government had to hold a bake sale when they wanted to buy a bomber, right, and schools were properly funded, that's kind of what we'd have in a stateless society. Because if you wanted to, to create a system of capability of violence in the name of defense, you would have to convince people that it was really in the name of defense, and you would have to convince them to pay for it voluntarily. And obviously everybody knows that education has value, that having an educated population has value, that supporting children who are seeking education, supporting adults who are looking to improve themselves creates value for society. And there's a way that we can pay for that way more effectively when we don't have to pay for the warfare state. We don't have to pay for the military-industrial complex. We don't have to pay for the corruption. We can have competition among institutions competing to serve us rather than people competing to get into government so they can have that unique opportunity to rip everybody off.
I've also heard you say that you support privatizing borders. So how exactly does that work? What does that mean? Does the country just let everyone in, or should it be selling off the land at the borders? What exactly are you advocating?
Well, Milton Friedman once said you can't have open borders and welfare, and therefore you shouldn't have open borders. I would say you can't have open borders and welfare, therefore get rid of welfare. I'm a libertarian, and the essence of libertarianism is the non-aggression principle. And I ask myself, suppose somebody came from Mars, forget about any other country, just to distance ourselves from it. This guy came from Mars, and he started homesteading in the middle of Alaska or in the middle of the Rocky Mountains, maybe in Wyoming. And this is land that is virgin land. It's never been touched by human beings. The BLM, Bureau of Land Management, claims ownership of it, but we libertarians don't accept that because we believe in the Lockean, Rothbardian homesteading theory of private property. And in order for virgin territory, untouched land, to fall under some ownership, you have to mix your labor with the land, and nobody's done that. So anyway, there's this Martian, and he's knocking down a tree and putting in a corn plant. And did he violate libertarian principles? No. So any ICE person, I forget what ICE stands for, the Border Patrol types, who come up to him and kick him out of the country or in any way molest him, they're violating libertarian principle. So I favor open borders, at least for virgin territory, of which there's plenty around. I mean, the BLM owns, I don't know, half of all the land west of Mississippi and 90% of Alaska, and it owns it unjustifiably. So I think that a person who violates the law against coming into this country without a permit is a good guy, is not violating rights, and the Border Patrol that stops him are in the wrong. Okay, so that's one point. The second point is, but do we really want 10 trillion Martians to come into the United States? No, we don't want 10 trillion. Oh, 2 or 3, 100 or so, that would be fine. But we don't want 10 trillion Martians coming here, even if they're good guys. And I'm assuming that they're not rape refugees like those people who come from the Arab countries to Sweden and Germany and start raping women. I mean, that's horrible. So how do we have our cake and eat it? How can we uphold libertarian principle and also not be victimized by Martian rape refugees or just nice guy Martians? We don't want a trillion of them. Well, my answer is let's privatize all the land. And if all the land was privatized, then we could say, well, these guys are trespassers. In other words, the whole point of protecting the Martian is he was homesteading virgin land, but there's no more virgin land because every square inch of it is now homesteaded by somebody, And if any Martian dares come in, he's a trespasser, and we kick him out, not so much because of open borders, but because of trespass. Trespass is a violation of property rights and a violation of libertarian principle. So that's how I hope to have my cake and eat it. On the one hand, uphold libertarian principle, and on the other hand, not be inundated by a trillion Martians.
So something that you might be a little interested by, yesterday here in Connecticut, the state highways were shut down. All the state highways in the entire state of Connecticut were shut down for several hours. And if you were caught driving on the highways because of the snowstorm, police could issue you a $92 ticket. So you are an advocate of highway privatization. And again, you know, that when we had Noam Chomsky on the show, that was something that he was really horrified by about Murray Rothbard's philosophy that you could privatize the roads. So in a practical sense, how could you privatize the roads? And why would you even want to do that?
Well, the reason I'd want to do it is, do you know how many people die on those highways? It's something like 35,000 a year. 35,000 people every year die on those highways. They're a charnel house. They're horrible. I mean, 9/11, only 3,000 people died. In Katrina, only 1,900 people died. Now, look, I'm not making light of Katrina and 9/11, but you know, just put this in perspective. 35,000 people a year die on those government highways, and nobody says squat. Well, I tell you, I don't like the idea of 35,000 people dying. And I don't think it's due to speeding and vehicle malfunction and driver inattention and drunken driving and all that stuff. I think it's due to the fact that the manager of the road, namely the government, can't manage its way out of a paper bag. Now, look, I'm a big believer in competition. I believe the reason we have reasonably good shoes, reasonably good burgers, reasonably good violins, reasonably good motorcycles is because of competition. If somebody can't produce a good item or a good service, they lose money. If they lose enough money, they go broke. And the reason we have pretty good pens and pencils and cars and shoes and stuff like that is because of competition. Well, why don't we have competition with roads? If I own one road and you own another road, and on my road a lot of people die, and on your road nobody dies because you're a better manager, well then I'm going to lose customers. You're going to gain customers. Eventually, you're going to be able to outcompete me, and we'll save lives in that way. So I don't know. Is Chomsky a supporter of death? I don't think so. I just think he doesn't understand economics. He doesn't understand competition. By the way, if you could hook me up with him to debate him on economics, not foreign policy because I agree with him there, but on economics. So look, right now, the rules of the road come from on high. Washington, D.C. delivers all the rules of the road for everybody, and we can't experiment like in the I-10, which runs by me, and I guess it's the I-95 that runs near you, or the I-90 in Connecticut. 95, and I think also 90 goes east to west, somewhere near Connecticut. And the minimum speed is 40, and the maximum speed is 70. Is that the best rules of the road? Maybe what we should have, I speculate, is the left lane, everybody has to do 75, the middle lane, everyone's 65, and the right lane, every 55. Would that improve things? Would that reduce deaths? I don't know, but it's plausible. And if you did that on your road, whereas on my road I did 80, 70, 60, we'd find out. But right now we can't find out because there's no possible experiment. There's no possible changing the rules of the road. And on my road, if I caught you drunk and driving, I'd cut your nose off or something like that. And on your road, you'd deal with drunken drivers in a different way. The point is, the reason we have pretty good restaurants, the reason McDonald's and Burger King and Wendy's are pretty good is they outcompeted other fast food places. Well, why shouldn't we apply this to the roads?
That's what limited liability. Do monopolies exist in a stateless society? Might. Certainly some will. I'm a monopoly. I'm the only person who produces a certain kind of writing and speaking. That's true. At the moment, I think a lot of the monopoly problems in our society are due to government-created monopolies, but there certainly can be natural monopolies if you have a situation where the economies of scale go up to the size of the market so that one big firm can produce more cheaply than 10 smaller firms, then you are likely to end up with a monopoly.
Well, that is a criticism that you often hear from the left, and I've actually personally heard from Noam Chomsky, that in a stateless society, or the reason you wouldn't want an anarcho-capitalist society is that you're going to have all of these monopolists controlling everything, controlling water, controlling
Seems
oil.
very unlikely. Since if you look at how markets actually work, it's quite unusual to have natural monopolies monopolizing on the scale of a market such as the United States. I think the common monopolies in a market society are very small ones, such as specialized monopolies such as me, or if you have a small town, there's only one general store in it, that's a monopoly. How much monopoly power it has depends on how far it is to the next town and the next store. But I think the idea that capitalist societies automatically rerun to monopoly is inconsistent with the evidence that we've got, because if you look in most industries, the number of firms is considerably larger than the point at which anybody would worry about antitrust law. That we tend to exaggerate how common concentration is because big firms are more newsworthy than lots of small firms. And if you think about, if you ask what are the biggest industries in America, the restaurant and bar industry, I think, is probably bigger than steel and auto put together, but we don't think of that as a big industry because there are no big firms. There's no firms on the scale of General Motors, say. So I think it's an argument. The version of the argument that I'm familiar with is Orwell's comment that the trouble with competition is that somebody wins. And that's a misunderstanding of how competition works in markets, that in a market, firms win when they can produce a better quality at a lower cost than their competitors. And generally, as a firm gets bigger, you get costs of being too large, diseconomies of scale, and so at some point the larger firm is less efficient and therefore stops growing.
The main source of profit and rent is artificial property rights or artificial scarcities enforced by the state, and that if you abolish the special privileges of capitalists and landlords and force them to compete in a totally freed market, absent their special privileges and artificial property rights, all of that value that currently goes to profits and rent would be wages of labor instead. And it's a fairly broad current running through the 19th century. Benjamin Tucker and the Boston anarchists all subscribed to this view. Henry George was sort of in the same ballpark on land.
Could you explain exactly what Georgism is?
I think that Georgism is primarily the idea that people have equal rights to the earth and that this ought to be reflected in our institutions. George proposed in particular that we reflect this by abolishing all taxes except for tax on land. And modern Georgists would say that environmental charges fall into the same category as taxes on land and are appropriate, whereas other taxes infringe upon human rights and are inappropriate.
So could you maybe explain that a little more in depth? Why is an income tax, for example, or a sales tax, why are those bad taxes, but why would a land tax be a better alternative?
An income tax or a sales tax takes part of what a person produces and says it belongs to everybody. Now, I have a somewhat different view than the standard Georgist view. I think that if we have taxes on income or sales at a local level, that can be a reflection of the kind of society that people want to construct for themselves, and anybody who doesn't like it can live somewhere else. Whereas if an income tax or a sales tax is implemented at a national level, it is very difficult for somebody to get out from under it, and therefore at a national level it does reflect an impingement on what ought to be people's opportunities to benefit from their productive efforts. A land tax, on the other hand, represents collection by the community of the value of exclusive access to a resource that nobody made. Now, I depart from some Georges here as well, in that I think it's important to distinguish the sources of land value. Some of land value comes from nature, some comes from public infrastructure, and some comes from private development. It's the part that comes from nature that ought to be shared equally among everybody. The part that comes from infrastructure should be used to finance the infrastructure. And the part that comes from private development is best used to subsidize the private development that adds to land value. The idea is that all of the sources of value have claims attached to them, and the claims that the value that arises from human effort ought to be understood to belong to the people that engage in that effort and are thereby productive.
So why does a tax need to be collected? I mean, I understand where the value in nature is not created by man and thus must be shared. But couldn't you just go along the lines of saying philosophically that property ownership is invalid, and maybe going under like a Native American model where we just don't recognize property ownership? Is there something fundamentally wrong with that position?
Well, it's important to have exclusive access to pieces of land in order that land is used productively. There's the old saying that you shouldn't reap where you haven't sown, that he who sows should also be he who reaps, something like that anyway. And so it's important to make the land available for productive use to whoever can use it best. But it's also important to recognize that we all have equal claims on it. Now, if we were all equally productive and all wanted to use the same amount of land, then we wouldn't need any taxes. We could just divide it equally. But it isn't efficient to divide it equally. It's good to have a market that identifies the people who can make the best use of land. But then for fairness, we have to say that if you find it worthwhile to use more than your share, you owe compensation to those who thereby have less than their shares.
I heard you speaking about how you looked up to Henry George, or how you had read Henry George, and you also had said that you admired early Austrian economists, but said that you think that the Austrian school has been sort of corrupted and you don't have much use for the current version of the Austrian school that's out there. Again, just as a way to kind of get into the objections to income taxes, could we go into specifically what you may have meant there? What Austrian economists might you look up to and may have influenced you, and why do you object to the current Austrian school as it exists now?
The early Austrians, notably Knut Wicksell and Eugen von Bamberg, hit the nose on the head. They saw how you can separate land income from the income of man-made capital and adjust the tax system accordingly. Over time, however, that aspect has been pretty much forgotten, so that Austrians don't think about tax policy or think about it very little. They think almost entirely in terms of central bank policy. And within that limited framework, they do some good analysis, but the framework is limited. They never talk about tax policy anymore.
Well, let me ask, since you brought up central banks, what is the George's perspective on central banks? Did Henry George ever reference them? I mean, I know at the time that he was writing, the U.S. didn't necessarily have a central bank per se, but did he ever delve into that subject?
George himself never wrote or said or perhaps thought very much about central bank policy. Latter-day Georgists, many of them have shown a good deal of interest in central bank policy. So this is simply another split in the movement. If movement is the right word, let's say in the adherence of the philosophy.
What are some Georgist takes on a central bank? And actually, just monetary policy overall, is there any sort of general connotations that we can get from a land value tax or from the belief that land is common property that would expand or that we could extrapolate into monetary policy, or where the value of money comes from, and how government should either regulate or not regulate money?
There is a vocal minority of people allied with the Georgist movement who believe in things like the 100% money. They are so radically different from other Georgists that it's almost a separate movement. I myself have a fairly simple solution. That is, the major problems with central banking, in my opinion, come from the use of land value as a collateral for bank loans. In the 2008 crash, for example, was basically a crash of mortgage-backed securities, that is, securities based on land value. And the history of land values is to cycle up and down very rapidly.
You expertly predicted the 2008 financial crisis better than pretty much anyone else. Back in 1998, you wrote that a real estate collapse would happen around the year 2008. And you predicted that right on the nose. So I guess my first question would be, how were you able to do that?
Well, first, you start with an explanation of the business cycle, because it's not enough to look at the past if you don't understand why things happen, because things that happen in the past don't necessarily happen in the future. But the theory of the business cycle, the explanation, which I found most convincing, indicated a regularity that the theory itself would indicate that it is a cycle and not just random fluctuations. Then with that explanation, I then look at history, and the economist that was best at recording the ups and downs of the economy was a real estate economist. His name was Homer Hoyt, Hoyt, and he wrote a book, 100 Years of Land Value in Chicago, because Chicago had very good real estate data. And he found a remarkable regularity, a period of 18 years, in which you'd have an economic boom whose main characteristic was rising land values in construction, often spurred on by public works such as canals in the early 1800s or railroads in the latter 1800s. So you'd have an economic boom, and then there would be peaks in real estate construction and values, followed by a severe recession. And this occurred regularly up until the Great Depression, including the 1920s, where real estate peaked around 1925, and then you had the Great Depression starting in 1929. So then I carried on that line of thinking to the present day, looking at the major recessions of 1973 and 1990, and so writing in the late 1990s, the previous real estate-related recession was in 1990, and the peaks had been 18 years apart in the 1800s, and it was a bit interrupted by the extreme inflation of the 1970s, which created a peak and recession in 1980, only 7 years after the 1973. But interestingly enough, from 73 to 1990 is 17 years, so that's almost 18 years. So it looked like the 18-year cycle was back. So it's just a simple matter to count 18 years from 1990 to see the next depression as in 2008. Now, it could have come a little sooner or a little later, but as it happened, it came right on schedule.
So I've heard you predict similarly, and following the logic that you just mentioned, that the next financial recession or collapse will happen in 2026. Are you still holding to that prediction?
Yes, I am. So that'll be 18 years after 2008, so that puts it at 2026. So I would expect the peak in real estate to come a couple of years before that, say around 2024. And everything is on track. The economy has recovered, but very slowly. But some people thought there would be another recession. I talked to people who expected another recession 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and I said, no, it's just not going to happen, because you need high interest rates and high prices for real estate to come before the recession starts. And we have not had the high. Real estate has recovered, but it hasn't gotten to the extreme speculative stage that it had reached, say, in 2006, 2007. So therefore, so far everything seems to be on track.
Yes, the last 2 years have been difficult. And this year, much harder than the first. It's true that I've considered quitting at times, and that not doing so might have cost me my sanity. But in the end, I still believe that there should be an interesting podcast for the interesting people. I believe there should be media for free minds, and that there should be a place for the hippies, rabble-rousers, nerds, and square pegs to raise some hell. This has been my journey, and I'm glad for whoever has come along for the ride. I'm not sure what tomorrow holds, how much longer the show will go on, if I'll end up in the dustbin like Barnum and Bailey, or fight on forever like Paul and Nader. But for what it's worth, I'm glad for all of the conversations that I've had, the work I've put in, and the support that I've received in turn. So, for now, and for as long as there's still a contrarian voice out there, that voice will be welcomed here on Primo